didn't call for us because we were wise, or advanced, or kind. They called us because we were forged in chaos, raised on the edge of war, and we never forgot how to survive. We weren't their last hope. We were the first gamble they ever made that was truly unpredictable. The Grand Council chamber of the Stellar Conclave headquarters fell silent. Admiral Soren Kyle, his blue skin looking paler than usual, stared at the holographic display showing their territory. Large sections glowed red, marking planets lost to the enemy. We have lost another 3 systems this quanta span alone, Admiral Soren Kyle said. His forearms gripped the edge of the table. The Nitherian swarm advance faster than we can evacuate our people. Around the oval table sat representatives from the 17 species that made up the conclave. Many looked down, unable to meet the Admiral's gaze. Their once mighty alliance had been fighting for over a decade, and they were losing badly. At this rate, we have perhaps 1 standard cycle before our core worlds are threatened, said General Tazral of the Morgasi. His metallic scales reflected the dim light as he pointed to the display. Our forces are stretched too thin. We have superior technology, protested Minister Yulana. Her crystalline form sparkled as she spoke. Our ships are faster, our weapons more advanced. And yet we continue to lose, said Krolvex. The Nitherian swarm adapt quickly. They care nothing for individual losses. They sacrifice thousands to learn our tactics, then counter them perfectly. Images of the Nitherian swarm appeared on the display. They resembled giant insects, with armored exoskeletons and multiple limbs ending in razor-sharp claws. Their unity nexus made them dangerous opponents. When one learned something, they all knew it. They have consumed all organic matter on 37 worlds, now reported Science Director Helen, a small, furry being from the Rivenhold expanse. Nothing remains but barren rock. They strip planets completely before moving to the next. The room grew colder as the council members considered their fate. If the Nitherian swarm won, it wouldn't mean just defeat. It would mean extinction. Perhaps there is another option, said a quiet voice from the end of the table. All eyes turned to Archivist Velrun, an aged scientist whose species was known for careful observation. He rarely spoke during council meetings. Explain, ordered Krolvex. Archivist Velran stood slowly. Our deep space explorers recently made contact with a previously unknown intelligent species. They come from a small isolated planet in a rather unremarkable solar system. How does this help us? Asked General Tazrel impatiently. These beings are primitive by our standards. Their technology is thousands of cycles behind ours. They have barely begun to explore their own solar system, continued Archivist Velrun. But they possess something unique among all species we have encountered. He pressed a button, and the holographic display showed a small blue-green planet. They call themselves Terrans from the planet Origin Terra, and they have spent their entire history fighting wars against each other. Confused murmurs spread through the chamber. Why is this significant? Asked Minister Yulana. While we developed technology, they developed warfare, explained Archivist Velrun. Their history is filled with constant conflict. They have thousands of cycles of experience in combat strategy, guerrilla tactics, psychological warfare, concepts our civilization outgrew centuries ago. Admiral Soren Kyle leaned forward. You suggest we ask these primitives for help. What could they possibly offer against the Nitherian swarm? A different way of thinking, said Archivist Velrun. Our strategies are logical, predictable. The Terrans are not. They understand something about war that we have forgotten. Their technology began, Minister Yulana. We would provide the technology, interrupted Archivist Velran. They would provide the tactical expertise. Admiral Soren Kyle stared at the image of Origin Terra, rotating slowly in the display. Their situation was desperate. The Conclave forces retreated further each rotation. What harm could come from exploring this strange option? How would we even communicate with them? Asked General Tassaral. We've been observing them for some time, said Archivist Velran. We can speak their languages. They are a divided planet with many nations, but they have organizations that coordinate global defense. Admiral Soren Kyle made his decision. Prepare a diplomatic vessel. I will leave the mission myself. He looked around the chamber, unless anyone has a better solution to offer. The room remained silent. Then it is decided, said Krolvex. We will seek the help of these Terrans. May the stars grant that their primitive warfare is what we need to survive the Nitherian swarm. The massive alien ship appeared in Origin Terra's sky without warning. It hovered over the United Nations building in New York, its silvery hull reflecting the morning sunlight. Fighter jets scrambled but kept their distance as smaller vessels descended to the ground. Colonel Thane Calder stood at attention beside the Secretary General. At 52, Thane had fought in wars across 3 continents. His weathered face showed the cycles of combat, and a scar ran along his left cheek. He watched as the alien delegation approached. Remembered, said the Secretary General. You're here because you understand war better than anyone. Listen to what they have to say. Admiral Soren Kyle led the alien group. His blue skin and 4 arms caused whispers among the Terran officials. Behind him walked representatives from other conclave species, some resembling animals, others like walking plants or crystals. We come in peace, said Krolvex, his voice translated by a small device. And we come seeking help. Inside the conference room, Krolvex explained the Nitherian swarm threat. He showed holographic images of worlds destroyed and conclave forces retreating. The room fell silent as they watched recordings of the insect, like Nitherian swarm, tearing through advanced alien defenses. You have technology beyond our imagination, said Thane. Why come to us? Technology alone cannot win this war, replied Krolvex. The Nitherian swarm adapt too quickly. We believe Terrans possess something we lack, a unique understanding of warfare. You mean we're good at killing each other, said Commander Mara Vex, a retired Marine surgeon sitting across the table. At 45, she had served in 3 major conflicts and commanded troops in the most dangerous regions on Origin Terra. Dr. Zellmeyer nodded. Your species has fought over 15,000 recorded wars in your history. You understand combat in ways we never developed. Our civilizations grew peaceful too quickly. We forgot how to fight unpredictably. What exactly are you asking for? Thane asked. We need military advisors, said Krolvex. Terrans who understand strategy tactics and the psychology of war. In exchange, we offer technology to help Origin Terra. Medicine, clean energy, material science. Word of the alien visit spread quickly. Origin Terra's nations debated the proposal for rotations. Some wanted nothing to do with an alien war. Others saw an opportunity to gain advanced technology. In his small apartment, Thane watched the debates on television. He studied the images of the Nitherian swarm again and again. Something about their movements bothered him. They fought like a single organism, rather than individual soldiers. The next morning, Thane addressed the emergency session of the UN Security Council. These Nitherian swarm will keep expanding, he said. If they defeat the Conclave, how long until they find Origin Terra? We should help now, while we have allies, rather than face them alone later. The vote was close, but Origin Terra agreed to send 5,000 veteran soldiers as military advisors. No direct combat, just training and strategic planning. 2 quanta spans later, Commander Mara Vex stood before her newly assembled battalion in a hangar at Edwards Air Force Base. The soldiers came from dozens of countries: American, Russian, Chinese, British, Israeli, and more. All veterans with cycles of combat experience. "This mission is voluntary," she reminded them. "We're going to teach aliens how to fight." "Any questions?" A hand went up. "Surgeon, can these aliens even fight like us? They don't even have the same bodies." Mara smiled. "That's exactly why they need us. They think logically. We think differently." Colonel Thane approached as the briefing ended. "Ship leaves tomorrow at 600. The Conclave's providing transport. Travel time is about 3 quanta spans, even with their faster-than-light technology." "You think we can really help them?" Mara asked quietly. Thane looked at the assembled soldiers. None were young recruits. These were battle-hardened veterans who understood the chaos of war. "The aliens fight wars like they're playing chess," said Thane. "Logical moves and counter-moves. But real war isn't chess. It's dirty and confusing and unpredictable, and that's something Terrans understand better than anyone." As the sun set, the soldiers made final calls to family and friends. Tomorrow they would leave Origin Terra behind to teach aliens the Terran way of war. The Terran soldiers stepped off the transport ship onto the gleaming surface of Solstice Reach. The Conclave headquarters stretched across the horizon, a city of towering crystal spires and curved metal structures. 5,000 Terrans stood in neat formation, dwarfed by the alien architecture around them. Major Ronan Strake whistled softly. They weren't kidding about being technologically advanced. Colonel Thane moved through the ranks, making sure everyone stayed calm. Many soldiers were seeing alien life for the first time. The Conclave had sent representatives from all 17 species to greet them, creating a strange lineup of beings that ranged from humanoid to utterly foreign. Admiral Sorin Kael stepped forward. "Welcome to Solstice Reach. Your quarters are prepared. Tomorrow we begin integration with our military command." Commander Mara Vex noticed something odd about the alien soldiers standing at attention nearby. "They're too perfect," she whispered to Thane. "No variation in stance, no adjustments like statues." The next morning, Terran officers gathered in a vast war room. Holographic displays showed battle scenarios and Nitharian movements across dozens of star systems. Major Ronan Strake was assigned to training programs, while Captain Zira Thorne would work with the Conclave fleet. "Your ships are impressive," Diane said, studying the schematics of a Conclave battleship. "But do you ever change formation during battle?" Commander Zextal, a tall reptilian alien, blinked slowly. "Why would we?" "Our computer simulations determine the optimal formation. Deviation would be inefficient." "What about deception? Fiends drawing the enemy into traps?" "We rely on superior firepower and technology," replied Zextal. The Nitharians simply overwhelmed with numbers. In another part of the headquarters, Major Gordon faced similar resistance. He had suggested guerrilla tactics and asymmetric warfare, but the Conclave commander seemed confused by the concepts. "Small unit actions would be ineffective against the Nitharian swarm," said General Tazaral. "Our simulations show." "War isn't just about simulations," interrupted Gordon. "It's about unpredictability, doing what your enemy doesn't expect." By the end of the first quantaspan, tensions were rising. Conclave commanders resisted Terran suggestions, believing their technological superiority should be enough. They dismissed Origin Terra tactics as primitive and unnecessary. In the mess hall, Terran soldiers gathered at their own tables, separated from their alien counterparts. "They don't get it," said Mara, pushing food around her plate. "They fight like machines. Everything by the book." Thane nodded. They've forgotten that war is chaos. Their technology made combat too clean, too predictable. The Terrans got their chance to prove themselves sooner than expected. A Nitherian scouting party was detected near an outpost at the edge of the system. Despite Conclave protocol calling for a full battle group response, only a small patrol ship was within range. Thane convinced Admiral Krolvex to let a mixed team of Terrans and aliens intercept. 20 soldiers boarded a Conclave shuttle, armed with a combination of alien energy weapons and Terran tactical knowledge. When they reached the outpost, they found 3 Nitherian ships scanning the facility. Conclave procedure would have been to directly engage with superior firepower. Instead, Mara suggested a different approach. "Split into 3 teams," she said. "We'll use the debris field for cover and approach from multiple angles. Hit and fade attacks." The alien soldiers looked uncertain but followed orders. As they launched their attack, the Nitherians responded with typical coordinated precision. But the Terran-led teams kept changing positions, firing from unexpected locations and creating confusion. "They're like one mind," observed Thane as he watched the Nitherian ships try to track the attackers. "They expect patterns they can adapt to." With an impulse tick, 2 Nitherian ships were disabled, and the 3rd retreated. Not a single Conclave soldier was lost. Back at headquarters, Admiral Krolvex reviewed the mission recordings with his War Council. The victory was small, but significant. Perhaps, he said slowly, there is something to these Terran methods, after all. He turned to Colonel Thane. "Tell me more about this concept you call psychological warfare." For the first time since arriving, Thane smiled. The real training could finally begin. The alarm blared throughout the Conclave headquarters. Captain Varric Holt ran to the command center, joining the crowd of officers staring at the main display. A massive Nitherian fleet had appeared in the Rivenhold Expanse, a key supply hub for Conclave forces. "The Rivenhold Expanse has minimal defenses," said Admiral Krolvex. "Standard protocol is to evacuate and concede the territory." Varric stepped forward. "Sir Pellerin is critical. If we lose those supply depots, 3 sectors will be cut off." "We cannot move our main fleet in time," replied Krolvex. "The defense force there is not strong enough to hold." Varric looked at the tactical display. "Let me take a small team. We can reinforce the ground troops while you gather your fleet." The Admiral hesitated. "Your team would be vastly outnumbered. Sometimes a small force in the right place is better than a large force in the wrong place," said Varric. Against his better judgment, Krolvex approved the mission. Varric selected 30 Terran soldiers and 10 Conclave aliens who had embraced Terran tactics. They boarded a fast transport and reached Pellerin just as the Nitherians began their landing operations. The main settlement on Pellerin's 3rd moon was already under attack. The Conclave commander, General Etheron, had positioned his forces in a standard defensive formation around the main supply depot. "We should spread out," Varric suggested as they joined the defense. "Create smaller targets, set up crossfire zones." "Negative," said Etheron. "Conclave doctrine states we maintain a unified defense perimeter." Before Varric could argue, the Nitherians attacked. Thousands of insect-like soldiers swarmed toward the Conclave line. Their coordinated assault targeted the center of the formation, exactly where Conclave doctrine placed the command unit. "They know your playbook," shouted Varric. as the line began to break. "You need to adapt." Etheron refused to change tactics. The Conclave forces held their positions as the Netherians pressed forward. Varric made a quick decision. "Terran team, we're going mobile. Take 5 soldiers and secure that ridge. Carlos, your team takes the eastern approach. Rest with me." The Terrans split off, moving to key positions around the battlefield. When their ammunition began to run low, they adapted Conclave energy weapons in ways the aliens never considered. Soldier Gray Harris discovered that adjusting the power settings created an overload effect, turning the weapon into an improvised grenade. Mara rigged communication devices to emit frequencies that seemed to confuse the Netherians' Unity Nexus connection temporarily. Every Terran innovation forced the Netherians to pause and adapt, buying precious flare units. On the second rotation, the Netherians pushed through the main Conclave line. General Etheron was killed, and the remaining alien forces retreated to the supply depot. Varric's scattered teams found themselves holding the only defensive positions remaining. "Fall back to the mountain pass." Varric ordered over the radio. "We'll hold them there." The narrow pass became the final stand. Terrans set traps along the approach, using mining explosives from the depot. They fought in shifts, never presenting the same defense twice. When the Netherians adapted to one tactic, the Terrans switched to another. For 3 rotations, they held the pass. 7 Terrans died. The rest were wounded but continued fighting. They named the position Last Chance Pass and prepared for the final Netherians' assault. On the morning of the 4th rotation, Conclave reinforcements finally arrived. Admiral Krolvex led the fleet, personally raking through the Netherians' blockade and landing fresh troops. What they found amazed them. The small Terran force had decimated a Netherians' army 10 times their size. The pass was littered with Netherians' bodies, and the few surviving Terrans were still fighting from improvised positions. "Impossible," whispered Krolvex as he surveyed the battlefield. "Their tactics shouldn't have worked against such numbers." Varric, his arm bandaged and face covered in dirt, approached the Admiral. "With respect, sir, you've been fighting the wrong kind of war. Against a Unity Nexus, being unpredictable is your best weapon." That evening, the Conclave War Council met on the command ship. For the first time, Terrans were invited not as advisors, but as equals. "Tell us," said Admiral Krolvex to the assembled Terran officers, "everything about how you fight wars. This time, we will listen." The main war room of Conclave headquarters looked different now. Maps and paper charts covered the holographic displays. String and pins marked fleet positions instead of computer projections. Terrans and aliens worked side by side, planning the next phase of the war. Admiral Krolvex had given Terrans full authority to implement strategic changes. After the victory at Pellerin, even the most stubborn Conclave commanders accepted the Terran tactics worked against the Netherians. Surgeon Commander Juno Cade stood before the War Council presenting a new battle doctrine. At 38, Kelly had fought in urban conflicts and specialized in adapting tactics to unexpected situations. "The Netherians fight as one mind, but they expect us to do the same," she explained. "Their advantage is perfect coordination. Our advantage must be perfect unpredictability." She outlined a strategy that divided Conclave forces into smaller, more flexible units. Each would operate independently while working toward common objectives. No unit would know the exact plans of others, making it impossible for the Netherians to predict the overall strategy, even if they captured some forces. "This goes against all our military training," protested commanders extol. How can we coordinate if units act independently? Through mission-type orders, replied Kelly. Each unit knows the objective but decides how to achieve it based on the situation they face. Colonel Thane added, "Your technology combined with our tactics gives us the edge. The Nitherians adapt quickly, but they adapt to patterns. If we constantly change our patterns, they must constantly redapt." While Kelly worked on strategy, Terran engineers helped modify Conclave weaponry. The aliens had designed perfect, efficient weapons that never varied in performance. Terrans made them dirtier, louder, and more adaptable. "This reduces efficiency by 23%, complained a Conclave engineer as Mara Reich showed him how to modify a rifle. "It also makes every weapon behave slightly differently." Mara explained the Nitherians won't know what to expect. The first test of the new approach came at Raxian Spire, a vital communications hub the Nitherians had captured moondrifts earlier. Instead of a direct assault with overwhelming force, the Conclave sent 30 small teams approaching from different vectors. Some attacked power supplies, others targeted communication arrays, some merely created distractions. No team knew what the others were doing, creating a chaotic battlefield that confused the Nitherians' unity nexus. Major Ronan Strake led the main strike team. They breached the station's central control room just as the various diversions reached their peak. The Nitherians' defenders pulled in multiple directions, couldn't mount an effective response. "They're trying to figure out our master plan," Steve told his team as they secured the control room. "They don't understand there isn't one." The station fell in 6 pulse ticks with minimal Conclave casualties. It was the first major victory in nearly a cycle. Word spread quickly through Conclave space. 3 more systems were reclaimed in rapid succession as the new tactics proved effective again and again. The Nitherians, for the first time, seemed confused. Their responses became slower as they struggled to adapt to the unpredictable Terran methods. In the council chamber, Admiral Krolvex studied reports from the front lines. "The Nitherians are pulling back forces from multiple sectors," he announced. "They appear to be consolidating their fleet." "They're reassessing," said Colonel Thane. "Their whole strategy depends on predicting enemy actions. We've taken that away from them." Mira looked at the star map, now showing Conclave territory expanding instead of shrinking. "This is just the beginning," she said. "The Nitherians will adapt eventually. We need to be ready when they do." Outside the chamber, Terran soldiers trained select Conclave troops in special operations tactics. The aliens struggled with concepts like improvisation and initiative after generations of rigid military doctrine, but they were learning. A young Conclave officer approached Kelly after training. "I understand now what he said. War is not a science. It is an art." Kelly smiled. "Exactly, and the Nitherians only know science." For the first time since the war began, hope spread through Conclave worlds. The tide was turning. The enemy that was winning now faced something they had never encountered before: the unpredictable nature of Terran warfare. The early warning alarms sounded throughout Conclave headquarters. Admiral Soren Keel rushed to the command center where Colonel Thane and the other Terran officers were already studying the tactical display. "The Nitherians have launched a major counter-offensive," said Thane, pointing to multiple red icons moving across the map. 3 battle groups, targeting our manufacturing worlds. Commander Mara Vex frowned as she studied the enemy movements. "Something's different. Their tactics are changing." She was right. The Nitherians no longer moved in their usual tight formations. Their ships spread out using cover and varying their approach vectors. The Unity Nexus was learning. "They're copying us," said Admiral Sorin Kael, "adapting to our methods." The Conclave rushed reinforcements to the threatened sectors, but the Nitharians had timed their attack perfectly. On the planet Zareth, a major industrial center, Lieutenant Ryan Cooper led a mixed team of Terran and alien special forces. Their mission was to defend the main power plants supplying the weapon factories. The Nitharians landed in scattered groups instead of their usual massive swarm. They used terrain features for cover and set ambushes, tactics they had never employed before. "They're fighting like us," Ryan told his team as they fell back to a defensive position. "They're learning." The battle for Zareth lasted 3 rotations. Ryan's team was cut off from the main Conclave forces and found themselves operating behind enemy lines. While hiding in an abandoned mining complex, they discovered something disturbing: a Nitharian's research facility. Inside were holding cells containing captured Terrans. The Nitharians were studying them, learning how Terrans fought and fought. Monitoring equipment, recorded their brain activity and physical responses. "This is how they're adapting so quickly," Ryan said. "They're literally getting inside our heads." One of the Conclave aliens, a telepathic medicine named Telepath Idris, touched the wall of the facility and closed her eyes. "They are connected to the Hague mind. Every observation is instantly shared across all Nitharians' forces." Ryan knew they needed to free the prisoners and destroy the facility, but he also saw an opportunity. "If they can learn from us, maybe we can feed them the wrong lessons." The team infiltrated the facility using breaching charges made from mining explosives. They freed 20 Terran prisoners, all former soldiers captured in various battles. The free Terrans were weak but determined to help. "They kept asking us questions," said one rescued soldier, "about why we make certain decisions in battle. They're studying how we think." As the team prepared to destroy the facility, Ryan had an idea. "Telepath Idris, can you project thoughts that the Nitharians would pick up?" The Medusan nodded. "With physical contact to their communication node, yes." "Good. Let's give them something to think about." While the rest of the team planted explosives, Ryan and Telepath Idris accessed the main communication node. Telepath Idris placed her hands on the pulsing organic technology and began projecting false tactical information into the Nitharians' network. Incorrect Terran battle doctrines, flawed assumptions about strategy, and misleading information about Conclave plans. "Will this work?" asked one of the alien team members. "Terrans have a concept called disinformation," Ryan explained. "In war, sometimes feeding your enemy false information is more valuable than denying them any information at all." As they evacuated with the free prisoners, the facility exploded behind them. Ryan's team made their way through Nitharians-controlled territory, using the very confusion they had created to mask their movements. Back at Conclave headquarters, word of the Nitharians' adaptation spread concern. The initial advantage of Terran unpredictability was fading as the enemy learned. "We need to take this further," Colonel Thane told the War Council. "If they're studying how we think, let's give them contradictory information. Different units should use completely different tactics. We'll make our own forces a mystery even to ourselves." Admiral Krolvex considered this. "You suggest we intentionally create confusion in our own ranks?" Thane nodded. "Exactly. Controlled chaos." "The Nitharians think they're learning to predict us, but what if there's nothing consistent to predict?" When Ryan's team finally returned with the rescued prisoners and information about the research facility, their discovery changed the war strategy. The Conclave began a new campaign, not just of unpredictable tactics, but of deliberate misinformation. They leaked false battle plans. They established patterns only to break them. They created an environment where the Nytherians could never be certain which Terran behaviors were real and which were deceptions. Slowly, the Nytherians' advance faltered as confusion spread through their Unity Nexus. The massive Conclave fleet gathered at the edge of the Vandrel Shroud. Over 500 ships of various sizes formed into groups, each one led by Terran commanders. 6 moondrifts of victories had pushed the Nytherians back to their core systems. Now the Conclave prepared for the final push into Nytherians' territory. General Kalen Ress stood on the bridge of the flagship studying star charts with Admiral WarpVox. At 56, Patricia had spent 30 cycles in military service on Origin Terra before joining the Conclave forces. Her gray hair was cut short, and her eyes missed nothing as she reviewed the battle plan. The Nytherians' home system has 7 planets, she said. Their queen resides on the 3rd world. Our intelligence suggests she directly controls the Unity Nexus from there. A direct assault would be costly, said Admiral WarpVox. Their defenses are concentrated around the home system. Patricia smiled. That's why we won't attack directly. She outlined her plan. A complex series of feints and misdirections designed to scatter the Nytherians' forces. 3 separate Conclave fleets would threaten different systems, forcing the Nytherians to divide their ships. And the real attack? Asked WarpVox. A small strike team, Patricia replied. While their fleets are distracted, we slip through with our fastest ships and target the Queen directly. The plan was approved, and the Conclave forces moved into position. Terran psychological warfare units broadcast confusing signals across Nytherians' communication channels. Some contained false battle plans. Others held meaningless static, designed to stress the Unity Nexus's ability to process information. The first phase worked perfectly. Vorax forces rushed to defend systems that were under only light attack, leaving gaps in their defensive line. The main Nytherians' fleet chased a decoy group, falling for the Terran deception. Sergeant Ty Loren led the strike team aboard the Conclave's most advanced stealth ship. Frank had once been a Special Forces operator on Earth, specializing in high-risk infiltrations. His team consisted of 20 Terrans and 10 aliens who had mastered Terran fighting methods. Their ships slipped through the thin Nytherians' defenses and approached the Queen's planet. As they entered orbit, automated defenses detected them and opened fire. The ship took damage but managed to land near a massive structure that housed the Nytherians' command center. Remember, Frank told his team as they prepared to disembark. We need to reach the central chamber and disrupt the Queen's connection to the Unity Nexus, even temporarily. The team fought their way through the structure, facing increasing resistance as they approached the center. The Nytherians' defenders fought with desperate intensity, sensing the threat to their queen. Conclave technology had provided the team with advanced weapons, but it was Terran combat skills that made the difference. In close quarters, the Terran soldiers demonstrated why they excelled at warfare. They adapted instantly to changing situations, used the environment to their advantage, and coordinated without needing to speak. The aliens on the team had learned these skills through moondrifts of training. A Medusan named Telepath Idris used her telepathic abilities to confuse nearby Nytherians. A reptilian warrior named Kexfor had abandoned his species' formal combat style for the more fluid Terran approach. After pulse ticks of fighting, they reached the massive doors of the central chamber. Conclave explosives breached the entrance, and Frank led the team inside. There, suspended in a glowing energy field, was the Nitharian's queen, a creature 4 times larger than the drones, with an enlarged head housing and enormous brain. The mural transmitter yelled Frank, pointing to a pulsing device above the queen. That's what connects her to the hive mind. While half the team held off the guards, Frank and 3 others fought their way to the control platform. The queen screeched a sound that made the Terran's ears bleed. 2 team members felt their minds overwhelmed by the psychic assault. Frank reached the transmitter and placed the disruptor device. The queen sensed his intention and lashed out with a massive limb, catching him across the chest. Despite broken ribs, Frank activated the device. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Throughout Nitharian space, drones suddenly lost their perfect coordination. Ships stopped in mid-maneuver. Ground forces fell into confusion. Frank dragged himself back to his team as the chamber shook around them. Mission accomplished. He gasped through the pain. Let's go home. In space, the Conclave fleets pressed their advantage, pushing toward the heart of Nitharian's territory. For the first time since the war began, victory seemed possible. 1 moondrift after the attack on the Nitharian's queen, the Conclave War Council gathered on the flagship orbiting the Nitharian's homeworld. The massive space battle had ended with the surrender of the Nitharian's forces. Disabled ships drifted in space, and the queen had been captured alive when Conclave forces took the command center. Colonel Thane Harmon stood at the window watching as Conclave vessels secured the planet below. After nearly a cycle of fighting alongside the alien Conclave, he had seen enough death and destruction. What happens now? He asked Admiral Krolvex, who joined him at the window. Our tradition would be to eliminate the threat entirely, said the Admiral. The Nitharians have destroyed dozens of worlds. They would have consumed us all, given the chance. Commander Mara Vex, now promoted to commander, shook her head. Genocide isn't victory. It's just more death. The Council debated for pulse ticks. Many Conclave species wanted the Nitharians completely destroyed, arguing that the Unity Nexus would always be a threat. The Terran representatives pushed for a different approach. On Earth, we learned that how you end a war determines if it's truly over, said General Kalen Ress. Kill them all, and survivors will remember and seek revenge someday. Find a way for both sides to live, and peace has a chance. In the end, the Terrans prevailed. The Conclave presented terms to the Nitharian's queen. Her species would be confined to their home system. Their military capabilities would be limited and monitored. In exchange, they would be allowed to exist. The queen, her connection to the Unity Nexus, temporarily restored under controlled conditions, agreed to the terms. Without her armies spread across the galaxy, the Nitharians could sustain themselves on their own worlds without consuming others. 2 quanta spans later, representatives from all Conclave species gathered on Solstice Reach for a formal ceremony. Origin Terra was granted full membership in the Stellar Conclave. The technology promised in exchange for Terran help was delivered along with additional rewards for their crucial role in winning the war. After the ceremony, Admiral Sorin Kael approached Colonel Thane and Commander Lisef as they stood in the garden outside the Grand Hall. "You Terrans confuse me," admitted the Admiral. "You excel at warfare like no species we have encountered, yet you chose mercy when victory was yours. That's the paradox of humanity," said Thane. "We know how to fight because we've done too much of it. but we also know the cost of fighting without limits. Your species taught us something important, said Krolvex. The Conclave had forgotten the value of struggle. Our technology advanced so quickly that we never needed to develop the adaptability that comes from overcoming challenges. And now, asked Mara, now we establish a permanent military academy with Terrans as instructors. Not to make us warriors, but to teach us how to think like you, to adapt, to innovate, to question established patterns. The next morning, a new group of Conclave cadets gathered for their first training session. Terran instructors stood ready to begin teaching the alien species about tactics, strategy, and the Terran way of war. Thane and Mara watched from an observation platform as Frank Martinez recovered from his injuries during the final battle addressed the class. The strongest weapon isn't a gun or a ship, Frank told the cadets. It's here. He tapped his head. And here. He placed his hand over his heart. Technology is a tool, but it's your mind and your spirit that win battles. Mara smiled as she watched the eager faces of the cadets. Do you think they'll ever really understand? Maybe not completely, replied Thane, but they don't need to become Terran. They just need to learn what we learn through our long history of conflict. And what's that? Asked Mara. Thane gestured toward the starfield, visible through the window. That winning isn't about having the biggest guns or the most advanced technology. It's about having the will to keep fighting when all hope seems lost, and the wisdom to show mercy when victory is yours. As they turned to leave, Mara looked back at the classroom where Conclave species that had once been on the brink of extinction now learned from Terrans who had traveled across the stars to save them. Not bad for a primitive species from a backwater planet, she said with a smile. Thane nodded. Turns out we had something worth sharing after all.